They say history is written by the victors, but what if the truth was buried with the fallen? Every secret leaves a trace, if you know where to look. This is The Broken Truth, decoding history, one broadcast at a time. The Broken Truth podcast, where history meets conspiracy. Every case tells a story, every story hides a lie. Welcome back once again to the Broken Truth podcast. I'm your host, Garrett, and today we're going to be talking about Operation Stargate, America's psychic spies of the Cold War. Late one night in 1979, inside a small town, windowless room at Fort Meade, Maryland, an Army officer sits blindfolded at a table. Behind him lies a blank sheet of paper. In his mind's eye, he sees something impossible. Slowly, he sketches the outline of a massive, twin-hulled submarine lurking in an icy harbor, thousands of miles away. Upstairs, intelligence analysts watch in disbelief as the rough pencil drawing takes shape. 3 months later, satellite photos confirm it. The Soviet Union has built a gigantic new Typhoon-class submarine, exactly as the psychic spy described. The CIA is stunned. The Cold War just entered the Twilight Zone. What you're about to hear isn't science fiction. It's the true story of Project Stargate, a secret U.S. government program that trains soldiers and spies to use extrasensory perception, or ESP, to peer into enemy strongholds, find missing hostages, and even explore other worlds. This was the Cold War's strangest battlefield, a high-stakes psychic arms race. Tonight, we open the declassified files on America's real-life X-Files, a saga of visionaries and villains, heroes and hoaxes, science and the supernatural, all verified through historical records. Join us as we uncover the untold story of Operation Stargate, the documentary journey into the realm of the psychic spies. Our story begins in the early 1970s, when the world's superpowers were locked in the Cold War. It was a time of nuclear brinkmanship, a profound paranoia. In the US, whispers spread that the Soviet Union was pouring millions into psychic research. Telepathy, telekinesis, and even mind control. A declassified 1972 Army report warned that the Soviets might be trying to weaponize ESP for espionage. If true, the Pentagon feared a terrifying gap. What if the Russians have psychic spies, and we don't? That question lit a fuse at the highest levels of American intelligence. By 1972, the CIA quietly launched a pilot project to investigate remote viewing, the alleged ability to physically see distant locations. The agency was literally thinking outside the box, hiding objects in sealed containers and asking psychics to describe them. Results were intriguing enough that the CIA took a gamble on something bolder. They granted $50,000 to the prestigious Stanford Research Institute in California to test whether gifted individuals could visualize and sketch far-flung targets of intelligence interest. At the Stanford Research Institute, two laser physicists, Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, led the experiments. Puthoff was a Stanford PhD who had worked for the NSA. Targ was an innovative researcher and amateur magician. Both had a keen interest in parapsychology. In 1972, they began working with a handful of reputed physics, hoping to transform psychic phenomena into a tool for national security. One of their first test subjects was an artist from New York named Ingo Swann. Swann was no ordinary painter. He was also a self-proclaimed psychic and a Scientologist, known in occult circles for claiming out-of-body experiences. In a now legendary experiment in August 1972, Puthoff took Swann to a magnetically shielded underground lab. Buried under layers of concrete and steel was a sensitive magnetometer device. Swann calmly focused his mind on the device, and to Puthoff's astonishment, the readout needle began to swing inexplicably. Swann had somehow affected the magnetic field without ever touching the instrument. When Swann stopped concentrating, the needle returned to normal. There was no conventional explanation. Something inexplicable had occurred. These phenomena are real, psychic phenomena are real, one scientist later affirmed. The US government, confronting the seemingly impossible, was officially intrigued. Dr. Dean Radin, a quote from him: "In the early 1970s, in the midst of the Cold War, the US government agreed something odd was happening that deserved investigation." Radin is a parapsychology researcher who later worked on the Stargate program. The magnetometer experiment made waves in classified circles. If Swann's mind could influence a shielded device, perhaps he could also see distant places with his mind. Puthoff and Targ soon asked Swann to attempt this quote-unquote remote viewing, describing a hidden target location from thousands of miles away. In one test, Swann allegedly described features inside a top-secret NSA listening post in West Virginia, even reading words on file folders in the facility. In another test, he was handed only latitude and longitude coordinates and asked what he saw there. Swann envisioned a sprawling site with new construction and a giant crane. In fact, at those coordinates lay a Soviet nuclear weapons complex in Semipalatinsk, Kazakhstan, and satellite imagery later confirmed a massive gantry crane was indeed there. The psychic's description was rough. Many details were wrong or unverifiable, but that one vivid hit astonished intelligence officials. On a sketchpad, the psychic had drawn a towering gantry crane with 8 wheels on its tracks, a highly unusual feature. Months afterward, when CIA analysts reviewed surveillance photos, they found a nearly identical crane at the Soviet site. Even the 8 wheels matched. One CIA officer marveled. It seems inconceivable to imagine how he could draw such a likeness, unless he actually saw it through remote viewing, or someone told him what to draw. Yet alongside these apparent successes came missteps and mistakes. For example, another Stanford Research Institute subject, former police commissioner Pat Price, produced pages of details about the Semipalatinsk site. Most of Prince's data proved wrong or impossible to verify, and he may have been influenced by leading questions. Still, Price's handful of accurate perceptions, the big crane, spherical metal structures under construction, were so specific that they kept the agencies interested. As CIA analyst Kenneth Kress, who managed these early trials, later summarized, in general, most of Price's data were wrong. He did, nevertheless, produce some amazing description, like buildings then under construction, spherical tank sections, and the crane. In intelligence work, even a 1 in 100 insight could be a game changer if it revealed something satellites or spies had missed. By late 1973 and 1974, word of the San Francisco psychics quietly spread through Washington's security agencies. The CIA officers overseeing the SRI tests were impressed enough to serve as remote viewers themselves in some trials, and, reportedly, they scored hits. But not everyone was convinced. The CIA's internal skeptics wondered if SRI's charismatic researchers had been duped by trickery or wishful thinking. Enter Uri Geller, the most famous psychic in the world. In late 1972, SRI's Puthoff and Targ invited the young Israeli, known globally for his purported spoon-bending powers, to be tested under controlled conditions. For 6 weeks, Geller sat in sealed rooms attempting to read minds and reproduce drawings, hidden from him. The CIA observed these trials closely. In one off-cited result, Geller did seemingly replicate a target drawing, a bunch of grapes, by sketching a remarkably similar bunch of purple circles. Puthoff and Targ were impressed enough that they wrote a paper in the journal Nature in 1974, declaring Geller's feats genuine. The media got wind, and suddenly, CIA tests Israeli psychic became a sensational story. But to many scientists, Uri Geller was a magician, not a miracle worker. The renowned skeptic James Randi, known as the Amazing Randi, insisted Geller's tricks could be done by simple stage magic. The CIA asked psychologist Dr. Ray Hyman, himself a magician turned professor, to go to SRI and observe. Hyman found the early SRI protocols full of holes, The researchers were providing way too many cues to the psychics and fudging results. He later said bluntly. When Hyman watched Geller perform, he concluded Geller was just a charming con artist who used misdirection. In 1975, two researchers in New Zealand, Dr. David Marks and Richard Kamen, obtained scripts of the original SRI sessions with Swann and Price. In a scathing analysis in Nature, they revealed how unintentional hints had crept into the sessions. The SRI experimenters often gave feedback or asked leading questions, effectively guiding the psychics. Marks and Kamen tried their own, cue-free remote viewing experiments, but failed to replicate any psychic effects. To skeptics, the conclusion was obvious. The SRI results were a fluke or a product of sloppy methods. Caught in the crossfire, the CIA grew uneasy. Publicity around Geller's tests had become an embarrassment, and methodological doubts lingered. In 1977, after 5 years, CIA officially ended its funding for SRI's ESP research. But the story was far from over. It was merely shifting to a new battlefield. If the CIA wouldn't pursue psychic spying, the US military would. By the late 1970s, the torch passed from the CIA to the US Army intelligence. The stage was set for Project Girlflame and an operational psychic corps at Fort Meade. The hunt for reliable remote viewers and usable intelligence from the paranormal was about to accelerate. It's 1978. The US Army has a problem set that satellites and spies can't solve. Hostages in foreign lands, hidden terror cells, elusive Soviet weapons. A few believers within Army intelligence think psychic viewing might be the ultimate reconnaissance tool, a low-cost way to gain an edge if there's even a chance it works. With the CIA stepping back, the Army leaders quietly pick up the ESP baton under a classified program called Girlflame. Girlflame. It sounds like a code name for a barbecue contest. What was it really? Girlflame was the Army's first crack at running our own remote viewing unit. It started around 1978, small scale at Fort Meade. We had a handful of folks, some soldiers, some DIA civilians, who either showed psychic talent or at least were open-minded. They'd sit in these cheap isolated buildings on base, buildings 2560 and 2561, trying to see targets half a world away. Located at Fort George G. Meade in Maryland, better known as the NSA headquarters, this motley unit was nicknamed Detachment G. They were the psychic scouts of U.S. intelligence, a weird outpost in the defense establishment. In 1979, the SRI research contract was integrated into Girlflame, linking the California lab's ongoing experiments with the Army's new spy squad. Perhaps the most important figure of this era was Major General Albert Burt Stubblebine, the commander of the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command. Stubblebine was an unconventional thinker. He believed the human mind had untapped potential, and he wasn't afraid to explore the paranormal in the name of national security. Legend has it that General Stubblebine even attempted personal experiments in psychic ability, reportedly trying to walk through his office wall via mind over matter, with painful results. Stubblebine strongly supported the remote viewing unit and pushed for expansion of its capabilities. Under Girlflame, the Army began sending selected personnel to SRI for specialized training in coordinate remote viewing, a new structured method developed by Ingo Swann. CRV was essentially a step-by-step recipe that, in theory, could teach any intelligent person to be psychic. Swann and SRI's team formalized this technique around 1980 to 1985, turning remote viewing from an art into more of a craft. Trainees learned to quiet their minds, focus on target coordinates, and record their impressions through a rigorous written and sketching protocol. One early trainee was Captain Ed Dames, an Army intelligence officer. In 1984, Dames and a few others were sent TDY, or temporary duty, to SRI to learn directly from Ingo Swann. Swann's curriculum was demanding. It involved honing perceptual skills stepwise, from simple shapes to complex sights, without analytical overlay. Dames took to it eagerly. By January 1986, Ed Dames was formally assigned to the remote viewing unit at Fort Meade. He became a monitor and trainer, eventually rising to operations officer for a brief period. While Dames proved an enthusiastic psychic spy, he also earned a reputation for pushing the boundaries. Fellow team members later revealed that Dames had a habit of secretly tasking viewers on UFOs and extraterrestrials without authorization. He was explicitly ordered to stop such fanciful targets, but he persisted surreptitiously. Dames also sometimes led his remote viewing sessions, consciously or unconsciously signaling what he hoped to hear. This violated one of the cardinal rules. Monitors were supposed to be neutral, not lead the witness. These controversies would eventually shadow Dames, but in the mid-80s, the unit had bigger worries: scrutiny from outside and budget battles at home. In 1983, the Army's remote viewing program was rebranded INSCOM Center Lane Project, ICLP, partly to escape the negative publicity attached to Grillflame. That same year, word of the psychic spies leaked to the press. Famed investigative columnist Jack Anderson published a piece in April 1984 exposing that the Pentagon was funding mind readers, a public relations fiasco. And worse, a scientific evaluation was looming. The Army had asked the National Academy of Sciences, National Research Council, the NRC, to examine the remote viewing program's validity. The NRC panel, which included Dr. Ray Hyman among others, delivered its verdict in late 1984, which was overwhelmingly negative. They concluded the results were unconvincing and not useful for intelligence. Facing criticism, dwindling support at senior levels, and the retirement of General Stubblebine, who was reportedly forced out in 1984 partly due to his paranormal enthusiasms, the Army opted to cut loose the psychic unit. At the end of 1985, Army funding for Center Lane dried up. For a moment, America's psychic spying effort teetered on the brink of shutdown. But salvation came from an unlikely champion, the Defense Intelligence Agency. Over at DIA, the Pentagon's centralized intelligence arm, a visionary named Dr. Jack Verona saw value in the program. Verona was chief of the Scientific and Technical Intelligence Directorate. He quietly arranged for the unit to transfer to DIA management in 1986. Under DIA, the program was codenamed Sunstreak and kept within a tight special access program, known to only a few. The team at Fort Meade continued their strange work, now as part of DIA's portfolio, reporting to Verona's office, code DTS. Through the late 1980s, the psychic unit stayed alive, on a shoestring budget and high hopes. They cycled through a series of code names as security tightened and loosened. After Sunstreak came DTSIG, and eventually by 1990, Project Stargate. Yes, the very name of our story was born in secrecy at DIA. By 1991, the program even transitioned from being an official black SAP to a compartmentalized but somewhat less restricted program. Portions of the activity were outsourced to a defense contractor, Science Applications International Corporation, with Dr. Edwin Ed May, a nuclear physicist, taking the helm of research. At its peak in the mid-1980s, the unit had as many as 7 full-time remote viewers and roughly the same number of support staff. Over the 2 decades of its existence, from the 1970s to 1995, more than 40 personnel would participate at various times, including about 23 trained remote viewers. In total, the government poured roughly $20 million into the psychic spying effort, a relatively tiny sum by defense standards, yet one that indicated enduring interest at high levels. As journalist Jim Popkin quipped, these were Washington's most expensive psychics. But were they getting results worth all that money? To answer that, let's turn to the frontline accounts, the mission these psychic spies undertook. From here, the story only gets stranger. The heart of Operation Stargate was operational remote viewing, using ESP to collect intelligence and real-world targets. Over the years, these psychic spies were tasked with a staggering array of missions, from locating hostages and fugitives, to sketching secret bases, to searching for hidden weapons. The declassified record and insider testimonies reveal a mix of startling hits, intriguing near misses, and many clear failures. Let's delve into some of the most notable missions, as documented by the program itself and later investigations. Cold War satellite imagery of two enormous Soviet Typhoon-class submarines under construction at a northern shipyard. In September 1979, Army remote viewer Joseph McMoneagle described a very large new submarine with twin hulls and drew detailed sketches. Months before U.S. satellites confirmed this new class of Soviet missile sub at the Severodvinsk Naval Facility. McMonagle's early vision of the Typhoon, featuring an unprecedented 18 to 20 missile tubes and a broad flat deck, was later hailed as one of Stargate's most striking successes. The Russian sub in 1975, as dramatized in our cold open, one of Stargate's legendary successes came when the National Security Council asked the Fort Meade team about a mysterious Soviet buildup near the Arctic Circle. In a session with Joe McMoneagle, often referred to as remote viewer number 001, for being the first and one of the most prolific psychics. The target was an unidentified industrial building in a Soviet shipyard. McMoneagle, in a relaxed trance, reported seeing a huge submarine under construction, a really big one with twin hulls, 18 to 20 missile tubes. He even sensed urgency, saying it would be launched in about 100 days. The intelligence community was skeptical. Nothing that large had been seen before. But roughly 120 days later, satellites photographed not one, but two new Typhoon-class submarines, one with 24 launch tubes and one with 20. Both had the distinctive hull design and broad deck McMoneagle had sketched. The match was eerie. McMonagle's data wasn't 100% perfect. He said 18 to 20 tubes in 100 days. The reality was 20 to 24 tubes in 120 days, but it was dead on in essence. For this and other contributions, McMoneagle was awarded the Legion of Merit upon his Army retirement in 1984, the citation praising him for providing critical intelligence unavailable from any other source to the Joint Chiefs, DIA, NSA, CIA, and Secret Service. Imagine a psychic spying program producing intelligence worthy of military medal. Here's a quote from Joseph McMoneagle. I did about 450 missions all told. The sub was one of the big ones. After the sketch, I got called to brief some folks in DC. They didn't tell me at the time, but apparently it went up the chain. Years later, they showed me the satellite image. I about fell out of my chair. It was the damn thing I saw. McMoneagle became something of a legend in the unit. He claimed many successes, describing a new Soviet jet fighter on a runway, identifying a Chinese chemical plant, and pinpointing a downed Soviet Tu-95 Bear bomber that had crashed in Africa. Indeed, one off-cited case from the late 1970s had a remote viewer, possibly McMoneagle or Pat Price before his death, physically locate the wreckage of a Tu-95 bomber within several miles of where it was eventually found in the jungle. Not every mission ended with such clear success. Consider the 1981 hunt for Brigadier General James Dozier, an American NATO officer kidnapped by Italian Red Brigade's terrorists. The psychic unit was tasked alongside conventional intelligence to help locate Dozier. Several Fort Meade viewers worked the problem. One reported impressions of a location in northern Italy, near a river, in a yellow villa, intriguingly not far off from reality. But these clues were too imprecise, and Dozier was ultimately rescued by Italian police after 42 days, seemingly without direct help from the psychics. Later reporting indicated the rescue came via good police work and possibly electronic surveillance, not ESP. The Dozier case highlighted a persistent issue. Remote viewing data tended to be vague and ambiguous, hard to act upon. We'd get images or words like water, mountains, maybe a sketch of a building, recalls one officer. How do you translate that into a raid location? Another case. Colonel William Higgins, a U.S. Marine kidnapped in Lebanon in 1988. A DIA remote viewer described Higgins being held in a specific building in South Lebanon Village. A freed hostage later reported that Higgins had likely been in that very building around that time. Sadly, Higgins was killed by his captors, so the effort didn't save him, but it showed tantalizing hints of accuracy. There was also missions targeting foreign leaders. In 1986, as tensions mounted with Libya, U.S. forces planned airstrikes to retaliate for terror attacks. The psychics were asked to locate Muammar Gaddafi, Libya's elusive dictator, in hopes of decapitating the regime. The remote viewers did not manage to pinpoint Gaddafi's hiding place. He survived the bombing. Similarly, during the 1990 to 91 Gulf War, psychics attempted to locate Saddam Hussein on the run, but there was no reliable confirmation their visions were correct. They also tried to find Iraqi Scud missile launchers and secret biological weapon sites. Whether they had any success remains murky. Insiders say that sometimes a viewer would describe a site that loosely matched an Iraqi bunker, but actionable details were usually lacking. One striking success on record involved an unusual form of espionage, catching a spy. In the late 1980s, a KGB officer was arrested in South Africa for spying. Unsure how he hid his secrets, South African intel asked their African friends for some help. A US remote viewer saw the man using a pocket calculator with a secret compartment or communications device. Acting on this psychic tip, the interrogators pressed the KGB man about a special calculator, and he reportedly broke down and confessed, revealing his method. It's an anecdote, almost too on the nose, a psychic sniffing out of a spy's gadget. Yet it was reported as a genuine success in program lore. Then there's the curious case of the missing fugitive. In 1989, a former customs agent named Charles Jordan had gone on the run after financial crimes. Desperate to locate him, the U.S. Customs Service consulted the Stargate unit. Angela Della Fiora Ford, one of the project's skilled female remote viewers, focused on Jordan's whereabouts. She wrote down a single word, Lowell, which she felt was a place name, along with impressions of a mountain area near an old Indian burial ground. No Lowell existed where Jordan was suspected to be, but there was a Lovell, Wyoming. Acting on this clue, agents went to Lovell and found Jordan hiding just 50 miles to the west of the town. He was arrested, marking perhaps the only known instance of a U.S. fugitive apprehended with the help of a psychic. Skeptics note that agents were already on Jordan's trail in the region and might have caught him anyway. Still, the coincidence was striking enough to even cynics in the office, joking about the lady with the third eye who got it right. By the early 1990s, the Stargate unit claimed an impressive sounding success rate on paper. In a secret 1984 Army briefing, the program's manager at the time, Lieutenant Colonel Brian Busby, going by pseudonym Brian Busby, in one account, reported that they had conducted 100 collection projects since 1979 for 24 different agencies. He stated boldly, over 85% of our operational missions have produced accurate target information. Approximately 50% of the 760 missions produced usable intelligence. If true, that's a stunning figure, far above chance. According to the briefing, viewers had aided CIA, NSA, FBI, the Secret Service, and more. Those numbers were later cited by Ed May and others to defend the program's value. However, critics would point out that usable intelligence might be generously defined. Many sessions were so general that analysts could retroactively fit them to some known fact, a kind of psychic Rorschach test. For example, a viewer might describe a chemical ship leaving Tripoli with dangerous cargo, when, coincidentally, a Libyan vessel named Batato did depart Tripoli carrying suspect materials. Proponents hailed it as a hit. Never mind that the names Patua or Potua the psychic gave weren't exactly Batato. Detractors saw confirmation bias. You remember the few hits and explain away the misses. Indeed, for all the headline making, 8 martini results, as they nicknamed the really jaw-dropping hits that left everyone shaken and stirred. There were plenty of fizzles, but the participants firmly believed they had proven something beyond random chance. They had glimpsed real targets with their mind's eye. Even CIA's skeptic-in-chief, Ray Hyman, begrudgingly admitted in 1995, the case for psychic functioning seemed better than it ever has been. The government findings do seem to indicate something beyond odd statistical hiccups is taking place. By 1995, the operation era of remote viewing was drawing to a close, for reasons we'll explore in a moment. But the program's veterans walked away with a treasure trove of anecdotes and conviction. One by one, many of them stepped from the shadows to share their stories as the project declassified. Their code names: Sunstreak, Grillflame, Center Lane, Stargate. entered myth, and the individuals themselves, once sworn to secrecy, became the core of a burgeoning subculture of psychic enthusiasts. Before we follow them into that world, we need to examine how and why Stargate finally ended, and the deep debate it triggered between believers and skeptics. Sorry to interrupt your regularly scheduled podcast, but this episode is brought to you by the Broken Truth merch. Support the show. Wear the truth. Official Broken Truth podcast merch is live now. Links in the description. And since you've made it this far in the episode, comment hashtag Broken Truth and leave us a 5-star review on your favorite platform. Because when you speak up, the algorithm listens. And so does the world. Even as the psychic spies plied their trade, a battle raged behind the scenes over scientific legitimacy. Was ESP a real phenomenon that science simply hadn't explained yet? Or were people like Ingo Swann and Ed Dames just highly imaginative, or even self-deluded? In this act, we'll pull back the curtain on the scientific scrutiny applied to Project Stargate, and how a final evaluation sealed its fate. From the beginning, Project Stargate sat at an uneasy intersection of science and the supernatural. Proponents like Hal Puthoff and Ed May stressed rigorous methods, control groups, statistical analyses, double-blind protocols. They published some findings in academic journals and invited outside experts to observe. Critics, however, pointed out flaws in many experiments, cues inadvertently given, small sample sizes, and reliance on a single judge to rate results. In fact, one persistent criticism was that Ed May and his team often acted as both the experimenters and the judges of success, raising concerns of bias. We've already heard how early oversight from Dr. Ray Hyman and others found the SRI work wanting. Hyman did not go away. He became one of Stargate's most vocal skeptics. A psychology professor at University of Oregon, Hyman was a co-founder of CSICOP, the Committee for Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. This was the skeptic organization of the era, debunking everything from spoonbenders to ghost hunters. With his background as a magician and mentalist, Hyman famously said, "You can't bullshit a bullshitter." He saw it as his mission to hold Stargate to scientific standards, and if it failed, to make sure Congress knew it. On the believers' side stood Dr. Jessica Utz, a respected statistician from UC Irvine, then at UC Davis. Utz had analyzed parapsychology data for years and concluded that the evidence for psychic phenomena was statistically significant. She even pointed out that remote viewing results from multiple independent labs showed similar effect sizes, with odds against chance beyond 1 billion to 1. In her eyes, by the 1990s, it was more likely than not that something real was happening. This scientific tug-of-war came to a head in 1995, under pressure from certain members of Congress, notably the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. The CIA was directed to take stock of all this psychic business. Congress had quietly funded and protected Stargate for years. Champions like Senator Claiborne Pell and Representative Charlie Rose were true believers. Pell, in fact, was known around Capitol Hill for his fascination with the paranormal, from ESP to spoonbending. Charlie Rose, not the TV interviewer but the congressman, had warned back in 1979 that if the Russians have remote viewing and we don't, we're in trouble. Their support, along with figures like Senator William Cohen, later the Secretary of Defense, kept the funds flowing when others wanted to can the program. Cohen later said the results may not have been consistent enough for actionable intelligence, but exploration of the power of the mind was and remains important. By 1994, however, even Pell and Rose agreed it was time for a definitive review, with the Cold War over and budgets tightening. Could they justify Stargate? In late 1994, under congressional mandate, CIA agreed to absorb Stargate from DIA, but first they commissioned an independent review by the American Institutes for Research. The task was to evaluate evidence once and for all. AIR convened a small panel and crucially hired Jessica Utz and Ray Hyman as the two primary experts to write dueling reports. It was a psychic showdown, believer versus skeptic, both eminent in their fields. The CIA handed over boxes of Stargate reports, data and tapes for their analysts. We had one summer to write the report, Jessica Utz recalls. She and Hyman each pored over the material independently, then shared notes. Utz's conclusion was straightforward. The statistical results of the Stargate experiments and other ESP research far exceeded chance. Especially compelling to her was the consistency across experiments. The hit rates, while modest, were similar whether done at SRI, Princeton, or elsewhere, often around 60 to 70%, when 50% is chance. It's really hard to explain that away by fluke file drawer effect, she said. Utz boldly wrote, "It is clear to this author that ESP is possible and has been demonstrated, emphasizing this was based on scientific data and not belief." Hyman, on the other hand, conceded some of Utz's points about the statistics but attacked the methodology. He zeroed in on issues like the lack of truly independent judging of remote viewing transcripts. A big red flag. Ed May himself had often been the judge of which description matched which target in their tests, essentially marking his own homework. The only judge who could make it work was Ed May. Hyman quipped, "That's a no-no." Hyman also noted problems like potential subtle cues, and that when experiments were tightly controlled by outsiders, the results tended to decline. In short, he wasn't convinced the phenomena was real, or at least not convinced it could ever be useful. The final AIR report delivered to the CIA in September 1995 reflected Hyman's caution more than Utz's optimism. It famously stated that hits occur more often than chance, acknowledging something anomalous, but concluded that remote viewing had never produced an actionable piece of intelligence. The information was too vague and ambiguous, often requiring backfitting after the fact. Moreover, the report criticized the program for inconsistent methods, that despite 2 decades, it had not improved in reliability. In one pointed line, the AIR reviewers wrote, "The use of the same judge across experiments compounds the problem of non-independence, a thinly veiled critique of Ed May's role." The CIA's conclusion was swift and unsparing. In November 1995, the director of Central Intelligence at that time, reportedly acting on behalf of DCI John Dutch, terminated Project Stargate. The psychic team at Fort Meade was disbanded. After 23 years, America's official adventure in psychic spying was over, or at least moved off the books. The news went public via an explosive disclosure. On November 28, 1995, Nightline on ABC ran a segment on the CIA's psycho-espionage program. The former CIA director Robert Gates, no relation to Dutch's decision, came on to pour cold water. "I don't know of a single instance where this kind of activity contributed in any significant way to a policy decision," he said flatly. Across the media, punny headlines had a field day. "End of aura for CIA's mystics," quipped The Guardian. "Spooks see no future for Pentagon psychics," jibbed another. The CIA, bruised by recent real scandals, like spy Aldrich Ames, was happy to cast Stargate as a quirky Cold War relic. They declassified a trove of documents, eager to show there was nothing valuable being hidden. Yet, even in its demise, Stargate showed controversy. Ed May and his colleagues were incensed by their portrayal. They felt the CIA's chosen evaluators, particularly Hyman, were biased and had ignored strong evidence. In a Nightline debate, Ed May faced off with Robert Gates and cited dramatic cases where psychics sketched targets they'd never seen with uncanny accuracy. But to no avail. The CIA had made up his mind. May later accused Gates of lying, pointing to that secret 1984 Army report boasting 85% accuracy. "Gates lied, what more can I say?" May told Newsweek, suggesting the CIA shut down Stargate less because it failed and more because it was an embarrassment. In the end, the US government's official stance became, psychic phenomena might be real, but they just aren't practical for intelligence use. Any genuine signals were drowned in noise. One CIA spokesman joked that in operational tests, remote viewers had performed worse than if they had just guessed randomly. The book was closed, or was it? As we'll explore, the story doesn't quite end here. But first, let's meet some of the people behind the program, the psychic spies themselves, and see where they took this strange craft after the government bowed out. They were an unlikely band of spies, Army officers, enlisted soldiers, a few civilians, men and women, with regular day jobs who happened to also be psychic. Let's shine a light on a few of the key personalities of Stargate, whose stories intertwine with the program's history. Ingo Swann, the godfather of remote viewing. Swann was there at the creation, a talented artist and self-styled psychic. Swann not only wowed scientists with early feats, like that magnetometer incident, but also invented the term remote viewing itself in the 1970s. Credited as the chief architect of the CRV training method, Swann essentially wrote the manual on how to be psychic for the US Army. He worked closely with Hal Puthoff through the 70s and early 80s. Swann's approach was systematic. He believed anyone could learn access innate psychic abilities with discipline and practice. Many of Stargate's later stars, from Ed Dames to Angela Ford, were trained in techniques descended from Swann's curriculum. Swann departed the program around 1988, but he continued to be an influential figure until his passing in 2013. Outside the program, he explored even stranger frontiers. In one famous episode, Swann claimed to physically travel to Jupiter and correctly see its rings before NASA's Pioneer 10 spacecraft confirmed they existed. He also wrote about UFOs and aliens, hinting at secret extraterrestrial bases on the moon in his book, Penetration. Within Stargate, Swann was respected as a pioneer, even if his more sensational claims stayed on the fringe. Pat Prince, the cop-turned-psychic sleuth. A former police commissioner from Burbank, California, Price joined the SRI experiments in 1973 and soon proved to be a prodigy of remote viewing. His detailed descriptions of the Semi-Palantinx site in 1974 included that famous crane and other elements that stunned CIA analysts. Price became a key operative for a few intense years. One oft-told story. In 1974, Price was asked to physically penetrate a secret Soviet research facility at Mount Narodnaya in the Urals. He came back with descriptions of a giant underwater craft under construction, which some speculate might have been the experimental Soviet Delta submarine. The CIA was impressed enough that Price briefed unnamed national-level clients. Mysteriously, Pat Price died in 1975 in Las Vegas while still active on projects, reportedly of a heart attack. But because Price had privately told friends he was being psychically attacked by Soviets and had uncovered what he thought were alien infiltrators on Earth, his sudden death at 57 spawned endless conspiracy theories. Some even claim the KGB assassinated him to stop his visions. In official lore, Price's legacy lives on as one of the most gifted viewers who produced at least one unquestionably accurate result, that crane, amid a lot of noise. Joseph McMoneagle, remote viewer number 001. We've met McMoneagle through his submarine coup, a decorated Army warrant officer. McMoneagle was one of the original members of Girl Flame. He came into the program around 1978 and served until retiring in 1984, when he got that Legion of Merit. McMoneagle participated in hundreds of sessions. He often emphasizes that remote viewing is not 100%. I was happy if I got 70% of the description right, he says. One of his celebrated hits was describing the interior of a top-secret Soviet research facility at Sverdlovsk. He drew a detailed sketch of a weird 12-meter-high spherical object under construction. 3 years later, satellite photos and defectors revealed a particle beam weapon tested there with large spheres in assembly, just as he'd drawn. This correlates with large steel spheres. Price and McMoneagle both mentioned in separate sessions. After Stargate's end, McMoneagle didn't fade away. He became an author and consultant, writing books like Mind Trek and The Ultimate Time Machine. He even demonstrated remote viewing on Japanese television, locating hidden objects live on air. To this day, McMoneagle remains a vocal advocate, though refreshingly candid about the limits. Fun fact, he attributes some of his ESP ability to a near-death experiment in 1970 and his practice of meditation, and he spent time at the Monroe Institute using their HemiSync audio to enhance psychic focus. Ed Dames, Dr. Doom. Major Edward Dames earned the nickname Dr. Doom in 1990s for his dark predictions of world catastrophes on late-night radio. But back in the unit, Dames was both respected and controversial. He was an expert trainer, by some accounts helping refine the CRV methods and introducing techniques of his own, like a variant called technical remote viewing. Dame's dedication was unquestioned. Colleagues recall him doing marathon sessions. However, as noted, Dames pushed into fringe areas, from UFOs to the prophecies of Fatima. Yes, he tasked a viewer to psychically witness an apparition of the Virgin Mary at one point, just to see if they could. After leaving the Army in 1989 and officially retiring in 1992, Dames founded SciTech, the first private company to offer remote viewing services to the public. SciTech trained civilian clients and even took on assignment. One early client, the FBI, to help on the Unabomber case, with inconclusive results. In 1995, when the CIA blew Stargate's cover, Dames became one of the program's loudest public faces, appearing on Art Bell's Coast to Coast AM radio. His sensational style claiming, for example, to have remote viewed an imminent killshot solar flare that would devastate Earth, both grabbed headlines and drew ridicule. Eventually, a falling out of his business partner, Joni DeReef, who ironically was actor Brad Dourif's wife, led to Dames losing SciTech in a court battle. He still teaches remote viewing via workshops and videos, always courting controversy, but undeniably influencing the popular image of a psychic spy. Angela De La Fiora Ford, the medium in uniform. Angela Ford, now Angela De La Fiora, remarried, is notable as one of the few women in the Stargate unit and for her unique style. A federal intelligence analyst by trade, she also considered herself a spirit medium. During sessions, Ford would go into a trance and claim that three spirit guides spoke through her: a cherubic figure, a young boy angel, and a 17th century British professor. The spiritualistic approach was eyebrow-raising, even to her colleagues. Some thought it verged on channeling rather than standard CRV, but Ford got results, including that high-profile 1989 fugitive case where she named Lowell, Wyoming, or Lovell. Her accuracy caught the attention of lawmakers. Senator William Cohen first met her when he was on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Cohen later praised Ford, saying she was one of a small segment of people who could key into a different level of consciousness. A number of tests I found impressive. After Stargate ended, Ford continued to use her claimed gifts, marketing herself as a medium for people seeking to contact loved ones or spirit guides. She remains active in the remote viewing community and often shares her experiences in interviews and podcasts. Angela Ford's story illustrates the broad spectrum of personalities in Stargate, from the ultra-rational physicist to the mystic. Edwin C. May, the scientist general. Though not a viewer himself, aside from dabbling, Ed May deserves mention among key figures. When he took over as research director in 1985, he essentially became Stargate's principal investigator through its final decade. May was a hard-nosed physicist with a hippie streak, a Jewish Hungarian cowboy. He jokes about his Arizona upbringing. Colleagues credit May with bringing tighter scientific discipline to the project, but critics like Hyman accuse him of shaping the results by acting as judge and jury. May fought doggedly to keep the program alive, even scrambling after 1995 to secure private funding, which he did, through the BIAL Foundation in Europe, to continue psi research. Ed May continues to publish papers on remote viewing and psi, striving to interest mainstream scientists. He has lamented that the field is burdened by strip mall palm readers and Stargate alums now charging to find Atlantis or predict doomsday, which damage credibility. May sees himself as the voice of rigor in a sea of sensationalism. Love him or loathe him, his influence on Stargate was profound. He oversaw 70% of its budget and 85% of data collection in the DIA years. These individuals and many others, Lynn Buchanan, Mel Riley, Gabrielle Pettingill, Paul Smith, to name a few, formed a unique camaraderie. They often speak of a sense of mission, even destiny, in their work. They were venturing where few dared, supported by a small enlightened clique of officials, yet they were also painfully aware of the stigma. Many couldn't tell their own spouses what they did at work. One joke name for the unit was Spooksville. Another was simply the Office of Unidentified Feeling Objects, dripping with irony. When the program closed, a number of them decided, why hide anymore? They wanted to bring remote viewing to the world, both to continue exploring it and, frankly, to make a living from their unusual skill set. The result was an explosion of private training companies, books, and media appearances in the late 90s and early 2000s. The psychic spies were going mainstream. And with that came all the trappings of pop culture and inevitability, the infiltration of the fringe. In December 1995, just weeks after the program's termination was revealed, an unusual classified meeting took place at the Pentagon. Representatives from the disbanded Stargate unit, including Ed May and Joe McMoneagle, pitched a last-ditch idea to the military brass: restart the program under private sponsorship. The brass demurred. Stargate was done, at least as an official line item. But outside government, the Stargate story was just beginning to capture imaginations. Freed from secrecy, the former psychic spies fanned out into the world. They wrote memoirs, started websites, and appeared on talk shows, pulling back the veil 2 decades of bizarre government experiments. A subculture of remote viewing enthusiasts coalesced. By the late 1990s, one could attend remote viewing workshops in Las Vegas or Virginia, led by bona fide ex-Stargate personnel. A nonprofit, the International Remote Viewing Association, was founded in 1999 to bring some professionalism and research standards to this new field. Ed May, Hal Puthoff, and others were involved. The public was fascinated. Here was confirmation that the government had a real-life X-Files program. It had everything: psychic powers, secret agents, hints of UFOs, and actual declassified CIA documents to back it up. The media couldn't resist. Soon, Stargate-inspired content was popping up across pop culture. Books. The first insider book came from Jim Schnabel in 1977. Remote Viewers, The Secret History of America's Psychic Spies. Then came a wave. Lynn Buchanan's The Seventh Sense, David Morehouse's Psychic Warrior, Joseph McMoneagle's Mind Trek, Ed Dames with Tell Me What You See, and so on. Each added personal anecdotes and sometimes fantastical claims. Morehouse, for instance, dramatized the unit's missions with a dash of a thriller flair, and was criticized by colleagues for embellishment. Perhaps the most famous pop culture science is The Men Who Stare at Goats. First, a 2004 book by journalist John Ronson, and then a 2009 Hollywood film starring George Clooney, Ewan McGregor, and Jeff Bridges. Goats presented a satirical take on the Army's dabbling in the paranormal. The title comes from a real anecdote: Special Forces soldiers in the 80s attempting to kill goats by staring at them, an experiment connected to an Army initiative called Project Jedi. That initiative intersected with Stargate's story. It was championed by General Stubblebine and a colorful Army Reserve officer named Jim Channon, who wrote a 1979 First Earth Battalion manual envisioning soldier monks with psychic powers. In the film, Clooney's character is a composite of several Stargate figures, mostly resembling Ed Dames and Glenn Wheaton of Special Forces. And Bridges plays a hippie general clearly modeled on Stubblebine or Channon, who tries to teach soldiers to walk through walls and use psychic intuition. The movie's absurd humor actually captured the spirit, if not the literal truth, of those times. It introduced the Stargate saga to millions who'd never heard of it. Though many assumed it was exaggerated fiction, John Ronson's book, however, did serious investigation and interviews, confirming that yes, the US military really tried these things, even if the goat heart stopping story remains unproven folklore. The hit Netflix series Stranger Things in 2016 drew heavily on MKUltra and Stargate-era psychic research for its premise. In the show, a secret government lab in the 1980s conducts experiments on children to cultivate psychic abilities for espionage. The character 11, a telekinetic girl, is essentially a stand-in for all the Cold War psychics in the US and Soviets tried to create. In one season, she uses remote viewing in a sensory deprivation tank to spy on Soviet agents, a direct nod to techniques explored in Stargate, though actual Stargate never used kids or gruesome experiments as depicted. Stranger Things brought the idea of psychic spies into the cultural zeitgeist for a new generation, blurring reality and fiction freely. Viewers might not realize how much was based on real declassified programs. A number of TV documentaries have tackled Stargate. For example, the Discovery Channel aired a reenactment of Angela Ford's 1989 fugitive tracking for a show in 1999. The History Channel has revisited the topic multiple times. For example, in History's Mysteries and Ancient Aliens. In 2019, the Third Eye Spies, a documentary by filmmaker Lance Mungia and Russell Targ, presented a largely pro-Stargate narrative, featuring interviews with many original players and even archival footage of experiments. It emphasizes those jaw-dropping hits and pushes the idea that these abilities are real and suppressed by mainstream science. Occasionally, you'll see a psychic spy pop up in fiction explicitly referencing Stargate. For example, The X-Files itself, deeply influenced by all things paranormal and government, had episodes with remote viewing themes. The 1998 film Suspect Zero featured Ben Kingsley as a former government psychic hunting a serial killer via remote viewing. And even Marvel's comic universe nodded at it. The character Viewer, or storylines in titles like Avengers, have included government psychics, though Marvel's psychics usually have a more X-Men flavor. Beyond media, remote viewing became a small industry. Training courses, consulting services, some former Stargate viewers offered their skills for hire, for treasure hunting, corporate intelligence, even locating missing persons. One offshoot was the Farsight Institute, founded by Dr. Courtney Brown in the mid-90s, which gained infamy when Brown claimed his team remote viewed a UFO trailing the Hale-Bopp comet, a claim entangled with Heaven's Gate cult tragedy in 1997. This was well beyond anything Stargate proper did, but it shows how, once the lid was off, the subject attracted all manner of fringe explorations. And about those fringe interpretations and theories, they abound. Some popular ones include: the program never really ended. It's a common conspiracy trope that when CIA said Stargate closed, they actually just went deeper black. Proponents argue that intelligence agencies wouldn't truly abandon something that showed any promise. They'd compartmentalize it further. To date, no evidence of a follow-up program has surfaced, but in 2017, CIA's big dump of declassified files reignited interest as people pored over the documents on CIA's website, finding tantalizing nuggets like that Mars exploration session in 1984. This fuels speculation that some aspect might continue under different auspices, perhaps in some agencies' advanced concept division. The official word is no, and many Stargate vets also doubt there's a current program. Maybe it's just top secret. Only a true psychic would know. Jessica Utz half-joked when asked if it might still run. From very early on, UFO lore intersected with remote viewing. As we discussed, Ed Dames secretly pursued UFO targets in the 80s, believing some UFO sightings were genuine alien craft. Ingo Swann wrote of encountering extraterrestrials clairvoyantly. One particularly bizarre declassified transcript, the one Slate magazine and podcasters had a field day with in 2017, describes an unnamed viewer in 1984 being given coordinates that turned out to be Mars, approximately 1 million BC. The viewer, reportedly Joe McMoneagle, narrates seeing tall, thin humanoids and ancient pyramid-like structures on a dying planet. He even says the beings evacuated in some sort of ships to find a new home. This was an official experiment, believe it or not, possibly just to test the far limits of remote viewing, or someone's quirky idea of fun, while the CIA evaluators labeled it silly. UFO and ancient alien enthusiasts latched on. Was the government using psychics to contact alien civilizations? To them, Stargate is part of a larger suppressed narrative about alien contact and psychic communication. It's very out there, but it shows how Stargate became a Rorschach test for beliefs. If you're inclined to believe in aliens, Stargate provides evidence in that direction. If you're into the occult, Stargate proves the government knows magic is real. If you're a skeptic, Stargate is a cautionary tale of gullibility. Another fringe area is the idea that even if the US stopped, maybe other countries did not. It's documented that the Soviet Union and China both conducted research into psi. The Soviets had institutes studying telepathy, psychokinesis, and so on, and the Chinese published experiments on children supposedly with psychic powers. Did they continue psychic spying programs? Could hostile nations be psychically peeking at American secrets right now? It sounds like sci-fi, but declassified DIA reports in the 1970s expressed concerns about exactly that, a classic ESP gap. Some paranormal theorists insist that psychic warfare operations have continued in shadows. For instance, claims that the US remote viewers in the War on Terror to find bin Laden. There's zero credible evidence of that, but the idea pops up online. Within the New Age community, Stargate's disclosure was born. It lent a sheen of legitimacy. See, even the government validated this. Many people in those circles view the Stargate story as proof that psychic ability is real human sense that can be developed. They often gloss over the negative conclusions and focus on the positive statements, like Jessica Utt's endorsement or that Army report quoting 85% accuracy. As such, a minor movement of consciousness expansion incorporated remote viewing. If you visit Sedona or similar hotspots, you might find psi training workshops that trace lineage to Stargate. Looking back, one can see Project Stargate's legacy as multifaceted. Scientifically, it remains a controversial footnote, an anomaly that mainstream science largely dismisses. Viewing the successful results as likely methodological artifacts or statistical flukes. Military, it's just a case study in the weird places threat perception can lead. Today, the Pentagon has its UFO task force and explores AI predicting the future, but no official psi program. Culturally, it's become legend, inspiring creative workshops and perhaps keeping the door open just a crack that the human mind might have untapped potentials. Today, all the official files of Stargate, over 12 million pages, are publicly available in the CIA's electronic reading room. Anyone can read transcripts of psychic sessions, including misfires and mysterious gems. For example, you can read how one viewer in 1987 described a sketch of a face that turned out to uncannily resemble a then classified terrorist photograph, an often cited hit. Or you can chuckle at the pages where psychics earnestly describe Santa Claus's workshop. Yes, they sometimes practice targeted folklore to test accuracy in known scenarios. It's a trove that both true believers and skeptics mine for ammunition. So, what do we make of all of it? Perhaps the final act should be one of a reflection, a cinematic outro, if you will, to put this journey into perspective. In the quiet after the Cold War, a once classified chapter of history now lies open, inviting us to wonder. In a darkened archive, reels of tape, and stacks of paper whisper of men and women who dared to believe the mind could reach beyond matter. Here, an Army sergeant's trembling hand sketches a distant missile silo he's never seen. There, a civilian scientist crunches numbers, convinced that those sketches are more than chance scribbles. What was Operation Stargate in the end? A triumph of human potential, or a cautionary tale of wishful thinking? Perhaps a bit of both. We see earnest faces of the remote viewers, soldiers and psychics, skeptics and dreamers, all seeking the same thing, the truth, however strange, about our reality. They pushed at the boundaries of what science thought possible. Sometimes they stumbled, mistaking fantasies for facts, but sometimes, just sometimes, they pierced the veil. On one day in 1974, a psychic described a secret crane in Siberia. One day in 1979, another drew a submarine that shouldn't exist. For those moments, the world seemed a little less ordinary, and the impossible, possible. In Congress, a senator ponders if funding psychic research is folly or foresight. In a lab, a skeptic flips a coin and watches as a famous psychic gets it wrong, then right, then wrong again. In the Nevada desert, a young soldier stares at a goat, willing his mind to stop its heart. The goat lives, but he swears he felt something for an instant. In a Maryland office, an analyst examining a psychic's report rubs his eyes. It's that blurred detail, a Scud missile launcher, or just a water tower. For every hit that made headlines, there were a dozen misses that remained confidential. Slowly, the weight of the ordinary dragged the program. And so, on a fall day in 1995, America's experiment with the paranormal came to a bureaucratic end. Signed off not with a bang, but a memo. Yet, the story refuses to fade away. Today, a new generation finds inspiration in Stargate, not in spies and war, but in questions of consciousness and human ability. What if the mind really is more powerful than we know? What if across the globe or across the universe, distance is no barrier to connectedness of thought? These were the questions that haunted the corridors of power for a brief time, and then slipped into public imagination. The legacy of Operation Stargate is a paradox. On one hand, it's a monument to human curiosity, proof that even the most buttoned-down generals can entertain wonder if the stakes are high enough. On the other, It's a lesson in humility, a reminder that nature doesn't unlock her mysteries on demand, not even for $20 million and a top secret clearance. Maybe the final legacy is up to us. The files are there, the evidence is presented. Do we see convincing proof of the paranormal, or simply a psychological drama of belief? Do we, perhaps, see both? Hints of a reality we don't fully grasp, glimpsed through a glass darkly. As the credits roll on this strange tale, we acknowledge those who embarked on it, the spies who stared beyond the horizon of the known, the scientists who wrestled with data and doubt, the officials who bet on the unlikely, and even the skeptics who kept everyone honest. Together, they wrote an odd, human story at the edge of reason. In the end, Project Stargate reminds us the line between the possible and the impossible is only drawn by what we know so far. And just beyond that line, there may always be something wondrous waiting, seen, perhaps, only by those brave enough to look with their mind and not just their eyes. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Broken Truth Podcast. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening on. If you enjoy our podcast, please leave us a comment below. #Broken Truth, your thoughts on the episode. DM us on Instagram. We respond to everything. We're super active on there. And again, if you enjoy our show, please share it with someone. All of this stuff really does help the algorithm to get our content out to more viewers like yourself. So once again, thank you for joining us for yet again another episode of the Broken Truth Podcast. Hopefully you enjoyed this Stargate project. And we'll see you next time for our regularly scheduled session.
In a world built on hidden histories and half-truths, we've only just begun to peel back the layers. Because what you've heard tonight was never meant to be known. But you were meant to find it. If you're ready to go deeper, leave us a review, comment your thoughts, share this episode, and step inside the archives. Join the inner circle, where the real evidence is kept. This is the broken truth, because the truth isn't whole, it's broken.